Looks like we're close to a quorum, huh, Kirsten?
Yeah, just about.
Okay. A reminder, if you could mute yourself when you're not speaking, we get a little bit of feedback. Are we good to get started? Okay.
And did you warn him? We've switched the agenda a little bit. She'll be putting it up for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Steve
you.
didn't want no surprises.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you for switching that up right at the last
I
minute.
knew you'd love it.
All right. I'd like to call to order the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District Board of Directors meeting. It's 3:03 on March 15th, 2021, and we are on Zoom. As a reminder, the minutes for this meeting are kept via a recording of the meeting. I'm Steve Fancher. I'm your vice chair. And we all know that Michael Jordan is irreplaceable. And there is an unwritten public meetings rule that if your irreplaceable chair is absent, that you treat your vice chair like he can do no wrong. And that means no snickering or chuckling if your vice chair messes up procedurally. I also want to mention that Emily with MCD is out today. So Kirsten Hall is helping with the organization facilitation of the meeting for her first time. So you have two newbies in action today. So there's bound to be a little procedural snafu here or there, but we will get through. So Kirsten, can you start the roll call, please?
Sure. Ann Gravitt,
I'm here.
Bob Salinger,
I'm here.
Lori Stegman,
Here.
Corky Collier,
Here.
Dave Ritma,
Here.
Eric Mueller,
Here.
Shirley Craddock, Eric Mullender,
Here.
James Allison, John Niama,
Here.
Jonelle Bell,
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid,
Here.
Paul Lumley,
Here.
Steve Fancher,
Here.
Tanny Stephenson,
Here.
Tony DeFalco, and Mike Jordan, I believe, will be joining us at 4 o'clock. I think that concludes roll call.
Thank you, Kirsten. Did we have any new members that haven't been introduced to the group yet? I didn't notice any myself. Okay, moving on. Kirsten, do we have any public testimony?
No, I'm not aware of anyone who signed up for public testimony. Is anybody on the line to provide testimony today? I think we're set.
Okay, thank you. So hearing none, we'll move on to our first item on the agenda. And that is going to be Janet Olson is going to present resolution number R-2021-03-02, approving a contract with James Marta for audit fees and consultation. Are you ready to take it away, Janet?
Yes. Hi, for those that haven't met me yet, I'm Janet Olson. I'm the finance manager with MCDD. And I'm here today to ask for this resolution to be adopted, and this is to authorize a one-year contract with James Marta and Company, which is for our CPA auditor for the Urban Flood Safety, Water, and Quality District. We're recommending James Marta as they currently audit the other 4 drainage districts as well as the JCA. They have been our auditor for the last 5 years, so they're familiar with the accounting system, the personnel. We already have a relationship established with them. We feel that this would increase the efficiency for the first year's audit, which would also result in a little bit lower cost than if we went out to contract with a brand new auditor right off the bat. The scope of the audit would include the annual audit of the financial statements, the related notes that are required for the financial statements. The audit will be conducted in the generally accepted practice of the meeting GAAP and governmental accounting standards as applicable. Perform required tests of the urban flood district, making sure they're compliant with the provisions of all applicable laws, regulations, contracts, and agreements. The preparation of reports that are required to meet all state and federal government requirements as needed. That would be, for instance, a CAFR, IRS filings, any A133 audits, which are for federal funds when we're at that point. And any other audit, financial services, or reports as requested. This would cover any consulting and recommendations for the accounting staff preparing for the urban flood safety, water, and quality districts continuous accounting needs.
Thank you, Janet. Does the board have any questions for Janet? Or, all right, were you finished? I'm sorry, Janet, were you finished with your presentation?
I am, thank you.
If you could maybe stop sharing your screen. Thank you. Are there questions for Janet?
I have a question.
Bob.
Sure.
Yeah, and this is more of a general question, so I don't mean to put you on the spot on it, but I'm just curious, you know, given the district's focus on equity in all aspects, how are we integrating equity into contracting and practices? Does that come into play? I mean, and everything you said made sense in terms of if being efficient and all that, but I'm just curious if equity, and particularly women and minority-owned business contracting and things like that have come into play yet, or if that's not germane right now.
Well, I will say that we went out for a formal RFP 5 years ago for the districts for a new auditor. And this was the consulting firm that was selected from that. We're only presenting that we extend this for 1 year to get us through this first audit and then go out for a new RFP, and all of those things would be taken into consideration then.
And Bob, if I can
you.
add, to that, Janet, it's just, I recognize we are going to be going through our mission, vision, values process as well as our equity committee. And it is anticipated that equity will be taking into account through that process to help to establish those contracting rules next year. But this, we just wanted to get through this first hump, and then I would anticipate, as Janet said, you know, we anticipate going out from much larger, like a 5-year, and a much broader reach of MWESB in the state for anyone that would be interested in providing these services.
That makes sense. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Are there other questions for Janet?
Steve, I had a question.
Councilor Stegman.
Thank you. So I see that the contract amount is $10,000. Is that what the other agencies are charged? So it's the same fee?
We wrote the contract for $10,000. That's what was budgeted for this year for the urban district audit. I don't anticipate it's going to cost us $10,000 for the first year, but the CAFR and some other reports are going to be included in that. Each district has a different amount. Some of the districts are reviews and others are formal audits. So the larger the district, as in MCDD, it's a much more detailed audit that they go through. It's a much larger budget, where Penn 1 or one of the smaller districts, it doesn't cost as much. So I don't anticipate using the full 10,000 this year.
Great, thank you, Janet.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I out of habit called you counselor.
You can call me Lori, Steve. We've known each other long enough.
Thank you. Any other questions for Janet? If there aren't any, is it possible, Kirsten, to pull up the agenda that has the motion language, and Vice Chair would entertain a motion?
I'll pull that up.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I move to approve resolution number R2021-03-02, approving a contract for audit fees and consultation.
Thank you. Tanny, do we have a second?
I'll second that, Steve.
Thank you, John. So we have a motion by Tanny. We have a second by John Niyama. Any other comments or discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? I hear none. So the motion to pass resolution R2021-03-02 passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the second item on our agenda now. And we have switched things up a little bit from the prior agenda that you might have seen. We are going to have Bill Owen now present asset management in a briefing. So Bill, are you ready to take it away?
I am, thank you. Well, thank you all for having me back again. It's been a couple months since I've had an opportunity to present in front of you. I was around when we were talking about the district systems and the components of that system. But today we're going to be talking about the district's asset management program, its fledgling asset management program, and explaining why it's important to us, what it has been doing to improve the services we provide, and having us get closer to management practices for utility districts, as well as highlighting what elements are going to be fundamental to some of your discussions that are going to be coming up over the next year plus or so. So I certainly want to make sure that I recognize that this presentation was put together not only by myself, but Amber Ayers, who's the current project manager for the asset management program, but also my co-presenter, Andrew Riggs, who will be stepping in just a moment. So Kirsten, next slide, please. So what I wanted to do to begin is to highlight three takeaways, if you will, from this presentation. It's only about 12 slides, so they're not terribly long, but hopefully we'll have an opportunity for you to recall back. There are some key pieces here that that's part of the asset management program. So the first part is that we're in the process of adopting industry best practices within this field by learning and applying asset management techniques from partner agencies around this area, as well as beyond, as well as subject matter expertise in the field. So in addition, though, the work that we're already doing in asset management is impacting our operations and maintenance, as well as our capital investments. And so it's influencing multiple aspects of the district's practices. And finally, we'll be talking about how this supports the efforts that your larger board as well as your subcommittees will be doing on many topics here to come. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to walk you through the first piece.
Thanks, Bill. Next slide. Actually, go ahead and next slide, please. So industry practices at industry best practices are sort of pretty well laid out for asset management. And before I get into those, I want to take a step back and just, I know that everybody has different levels of exposure to what asset management means. And I think equally important is why does it matter to you guys and how are you going to be involved in the process? When this presentation was first slated, when the snowpocalypse hit, I know that a one-pager was sent out, and I'm sure that many of you had the opportunity to read that, but I'm not sure how recently or how much exposure you've had to asset management in the past. So I wanted to define what asset management is to start with, and go from there. So the Institute of Asset Management, which is sort of an international body of experts on asset management, defines it as the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from assets. I want to touch base on those two pieces really quick. The coordinated activity of an organization is really important in that I just want everybody to think of asset management not necessarily as a discrete project or as a program, but as an overarching way to do business that impacts every single piece of our agency, be it finance, administration, operations, engineering. It impacts all of us. And then the second part is the realization of value from assets. I want to focus on this because it's what is value. Like if I asked everybody here what that means, they'd probably have a different answer. In the context of asset management, value is really the satisfaction of stakeholders' needs, meeting our landowners' needs. And that's in relation to the costs incurred and the risks associated with those needs. And I think this is really important for you guys because as members of this board, you represent many of the stakeholder groups that benefit from and are served by this system. As you guys work through mission, vision, values, and subsequently levels of service, so basically defining what our stakeholders can expect for their investment, and through the strategic planning, you'll be able to think about and develop as an organization and as a board what it is that you're expecting to provide our stakeholders. And that will directly guide us in how we're going to manage our assets to achieve and meet that level of service and that expectation. It also is going to, the outcomes of that will impact the revenue development, because if the boards decide, and this is maybe a silly example, but if the boards and the stakeholders decided they want to set a level of service to, protect against a Missoula flood, I don't know whether that's even possible from an engineering standpoint, but there's a certain dollar amount associated with what that would take to accomplish, versus if it was decided, no, we're going to go with a different level of service that has different costs associated with it. And so we'll be able to provide you guys basic information about the cost of renovations and maintenance and replacements of assets to achieve the goals that you set forth. Next slide, please. So that's asset management broadly. So why is it important at the district? It's important because we manage assets. That's our bread and butter. For the last 100 years, we have managed civil infrastructure assets to provide flood risk reduction and conveyance to our landowners, right? We own and operate a very complex system. We have 26 miles of levees. We have 12 pump stations, and we have to think about them holistically to ensure that we can convey convey water out of the districts, as well as to protect from floods from the Columbia River and the Columbia Slough. And so asset management really is a way of thinking and a framework of decision-making tools that allows us to meet all of our jurisdictional requirements, that allows us to meet our stakeholder expectations, and I think really importantly, gives us tools to report back to the boards to say, here's the bar that you set for us, and here's how we're doing today, and what our plan is to get us to where you want us to be. And so I would encourage this board to think about what their needs and expectations are from us, and know that we're here to hear that and to work with you to deliver practices to manage our infrastructure following industry standards to meet that need as efficiently as possible, as cost effectively as possible, and while communicating about what the risks to our services are. And hopefully that information will empower and sort of justify whatever future budget asks look like. The other thing that I wanted to throw out there that I think is really important, especially when it comes to levels of service and mission, vision, values, and how those tie to asset management, is levels of service isn't only, how much water does a pump station need to pump, or what level of flood risk are we willing to accept, but we can also set levels of service around customer service objectives, around equity objectives, around environmental justice objectives, and then measure our success towards those and help include those into how we think about how we manage assessments, or how we manage assets and how we do business on the day in and day out. So it's not just levees and pump stations, but it's the overarching whole of the day-to-day decisions that we make to optimize the investment of our dollars on critical projects to best meet the needs for our landowners. Thanks, sorry. Next slide. And back to you, Bill.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. So let's move forward and with that background to talk a little bit about how asset management is affecting our current operations and how it influences what we do for projected capital investments. So next slide, please. So, and to give you a sense of what we're doing this year, I'll go through some topics here and then follow up with what we're projecting to do next year, though we're at the beginning of the budget development stage for that period. Certainly the top on the list that certainly affects you is reporting what the assets and liabilities currently exist in the 4 districts and will eventually need to be transferred to this board for recognition and continued use. ORS 550 specifies we do this, it asks that we identify what we own, what its current monetary value is, and what liabilities exist now and into the future. We are also using a risk-based approach, not only for our CIPs, but forecasted maintenance as well, to influence what we want to request from our annual budgets, and then subsequently how that affects our rates. Our CIP projects are based on risk-based planning reports that come from our drainage master plans. We have 3 of the 4 district master plans finished. The 4th one's in process now. We'll talk about that in a bit. But we also have information from our engineering assessments from the levy certification work that occurred a couple of years ago. But beyond that, we identify what 20-year cost projections are for major maintenance repairs, such as rebuilding motors as opposed to just completely replacing them. So both of those concepts are influential and affect how we do business, and that asset management influences both. Andrew and Amber are currently in the process to finish our strategic asset management plan, at least our first version of that. A key piece of that was passing our asset management policy that some of you on this board are very well familiar with from our own local district boards. But a policy that broadly outlines how and why asset management will be undertaken across our organization, and expresses those intentions and the direction of those organizations by our current boards. This plan will identify stakeholders, identify what asset portfolio is, and other pieces that many of you are familiar with. Ongoing efforts include continuing to build our asset registry. We've been doing that. We focused on things we know best, with the pump stations and other pieces. But more recently, we've looked at concepts that are maybe a little bit smaller and not quite as noticeable, such as the tow drains in the levee system. These are pipes that are inside the earthen levees that capture water and drain it out, as well as the debris grates and other pieces here. But we're also going to go beyond just physical assets and get into intangible assets such as easements, and we're in the process of making that happen. So next slide, please. So what are we looking at moving forward? Well, as Andrew already identified, one of the key pieces we're going to be doing is better formalizing our levels of service. We have some informal concepts that we use internally now, but we would like to try to provide a little more clarity and focus on those, so it's easier to explain to others, certainly outside the district staff and boards. The asset management program is going to help us figure out how to accomplish that through a management of our assets. Examples of level of service could be a regulatory example, like meeting 100% of the federal levy inspections that are receiving a passing score, or a customer service example of providing service response within 8 hours during normal business operations, or can even go into finances such as rate stability, and suggest we can use a concept like to contribute to our capital reserves at 80% of our projected annual replacement costs over a certain period. So level of service can be adapted and applied in many features of our organizational process. Other product work that we're doing is our drainage and water quality master plan in Peninsula Drainage District number 1. This is the 4th and final master plan we're doing of our districts, and we should be able to wrap that up next year. This one is unique in that it goes beyond just sort of our traditional efforts to identify what problems and opportunities are for drainage system, but also get into more of the environmental elements that affect watershed health and water quality, particular for that particular area of our districts. Ongoing initiatives, including organizational education, helping the rest of our group recognize what are important aspects of asset management and understand sort of the jargon and why it's important. The next bullet is fairly significant for us. We currently are tracking our work orders and asset condition through a series of spreadsheets, and we recognize there are an opportunity that there are more sophisticated software out there to keep track of all that information. The tricky part for us is to identify how best to right size that work. Certainly there's software available that City of Portland uses, and Multnomah County and the state can use, but we're a little smaller than those organizations, so we need to find what works best for us. And finally, there are going to be other elements in the strategic asset management plan that we'll start to implement as well. So next slide, please. Let me end here with some thoughts about how asset management can help with your particular work in the coming months plus or so. Next slide. First off, probably the piece is probably maybe the thing that's easiest for a number of people to connect asset management with is the revenue development efforts. As Andrew has already identified, our asset management efforts and data collection should be able to help you with not only identifying the existing but proposed levels of service, and to identify what services are associated within not only our existing budgets, but how those budgets might change with revised levels of service. There will be a list of future capital liabilities from the assets and liabilities projects. The registry already identifies those assets that need to be rehabbed over the next 10, 20 years or so, but also identifies projects that have gone through a risk-based assessment before even getting onto that list. So there are going to be many, many inputs into the revenue development model that will be it'll come from an origin from the asset management efforts, including annual O&M costs, operating capital improvements, as well as CIP work. Next slide, please. But asset management doesn't just help support the work from the revenue development effort, but also from several other committees that you guys are involved with as well. Certainly the mission, vision, values is something that our asset management policy can at least help inform, because it identifies that we're supposed to demonstrate the responsibility of being good stewards of our assets. And many of our assets are essential to ensure that public safety exists throughout our districts. So we make sure they're in good working shape so it can perform as needed when they're stressed under high water events. But in addition, the environmental committee can also benefit from this work. Asset management is helpful to identify what processes and assets are most critical for us to operate effectively. And I believe that's going to be helpful for the group to identify opportunities that where we can possibly provide maybe a slightly different approach of how we maintain or operate those assets that could provide the highest value opportunities in the for watershed enhancements, as opposed to focusing watershed enhancements on aspects of our system that we don't really maintain very much. So it can help focus the conversation a little bit around those. And then finally, on the equity committee side, the principles that social and environmental justice have can provide some services that are associated with the asset management efforts as well, particularly levels of service, so they can be influenced on what types of levels of service that are crafted or potentially revised. Certainly the equity committee can have some influence on how capital investment priorities occur, as well as some administrative practices. Next slide, please. So I have 3:35, so it looks like we have at least 5 minutes left for questions or comments. We want to make sure that recognize that the district has started its efforts to adopt asset management principles using our best practices. It's already helping us in our O&M efforts as well as capital investments, and we certainly recognize that many things we're currently doing should be able to support your ongoing efforts here in coming weeks and months and longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill and Andrew, for the presentation. If you could stop sharing your screen now, I'll ask the board if they have any questions or comments. Stacy. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you were raising your hand. I'll say really quickly while you're thinking of a question for Bill. The word that comes to mind, I think most of the concept with asset management to me is transparency. You know, the topic itself, asset management's a little bit wonky, but the data that really you strive to pull from this whole effort, it really goes a long way to showing the transparency to your customers and to the general public that the services you're providing are at the best cost and the level of service that you're trying to meet. So maybe just expound a little bit on the concept of how asset management helps with that messaging back to your customers, the transparency piece.
Yeah, I appreciate that observation. I think you're dead on with that. We're like maybe a lot of public works agencies where we work a little bit behind the scenes in our work, and we don't really get a lot of notice until something really good happens, or something really bad happens. And it would be nice to be able to show some consistency in our communication with our customers, to identify what we're doing, why we're doing them, and how it supports them. Because really a lot of those levels of service are structured so that it's based on the customer's perception of what type of service we provide. So I agree with you, Steve, that transparency is a key piece of this.
Thank you, Bill. Any questions for Bill or Andrew? I'm not seeing any, so we will move on. Thank you.
Thank you
both. Great presentation. We're moving on now to a discussion from Evan Mitchell about the Mission Vision Values Subcommittee update. Are you ready to take away, Evan?
I am, thank you. Hi everyone, this is Evan Mitchell. I'm Public Affairs and Communications Manager for the districts, and have the honor of staffing your Mission Vision Values Subcommittee once it is officially formed. So we have two things to do today. The first is at the recommendation of the legal department. We've crafted a resolution for you to formalize this committee. I believe it was last month, there was a discussion of the two types of committees that this board could have, either being informational or deliberative. As we've thought about the mission, vision, values work, it's really going to culminate with a recommendation to the full board for adoption of a mission, vision, values package. So it's our recommendation that this be a deliberative committee. So that's one thing that we wanted to do today. The second piece is Stacy Humphrey is here with us from Coraggio Group. We've hired Coraggio to help facilitate and design the mission, vision, values process for us. They've done a ton of strategic planning work. They have a really nice, well-honed process, and they believe that they can get us through this, including doing some community engagement work in the next 3 months. And so I want to have Stacy introduce herself and talk a little bit about their process with you all. But first, and I believe Kirsten, it's on the next slide. Kirsten, I'm sorry, on the next slide. Will you put up the resolution so that the board can talk about that? And then in your packet is the resolution, the full resolution itself.
It looks like I don't have the slide for the resolution, Evan. Do you want me to pull up the agenda or pull up the driver's resolution document?
The agenda with the line.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry I missed that.
Steve, I will hand it back over to you for any discussion of the resolution.
Okay. Thank you, Evan. So the resolution is in your board packet, the full resolution. I'm going to open it up for discussion at this point. And Kirsten is bringing up the resolution or the motion language here, but maybe before we get to the motion, can we stop sharing screen just briefly and so I can see everybody? And I do want to open it up for a discussion.
Yes, I have a question for Evan. Evan, the last time that we talked about this, the major difference between the deliberative and the committees that do work for information is really about open meetings. So the work of the mission, vision, values will have all the additional strictures of being an open meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And
when you say open meeting, I just want to be explicit. We're talking about noticing the meeting in advance and having it be open to the public. Yeah.
Correct. And I think that this is going to be very important for something that's going to be at the foundation of this organization, that it just. Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, somebody cut in at that point, but the point simply is that in terms of transparency and keeping all of our public informed about it, I think that it's very important that we maintain that open meeting notification and open to the public.
Okay, more discussion, comments? We've got a quiet group today. I asked that you behave yourselves for the vice chair, but you don't need to be too nice. You can speak up, speak your mind. I'm sure Evan's kicking me under the tip. Any other comments, questions?
Mr. Chair, I just had one, just kind of for my own edification. Maybe it's for Hong. Under the first whereas, after we talk about the purpose of the board, it's what is that? The rest of that sentence?
Among others, inter alia?
Inter alia.
This is Kelly Sherbo. That just means among other things.
Okay. I've just not seen that before, sorry.
I asked the same question, Tanny. It's okay.
Okay.
That's why the lawyers get paid the big bucks.
Who's on the subcommittee? Just kind of curious. Am I?
You are. So
I am, okay then.
So far, the volunteers have been yourself, Paul, Corky, Mary Helen. I don't have the list in front of me, but I'm coming up with it. Who am I missing? John Miyama and Councillor Craddock and John L. Bell and Bob Salinger. Couldn't miss Bob. So I think it's a really great group. It's very representative of the communities we serve. There's a few key constituencies that we're talking about, how do we make sure are well represented throughout the process, which Stacy can talk a little bit more about. And you should have received an initial email from Kirsten on Friday to schedule what we're calling an equity alignment discussion, which is really how we're going to handle and center equity throughout this project. So which might be a good, I guess that's a good segue for Stacy, but we still have to pass that resolution.
Okay, any other questions, comments for Evan before I ask to entertain a motion?
This is Corky. I'll just jump in and make sure that everybody's really understands that this is way beyond the typical mission, vision, values kind of conversation, because I think, somebody correct me if I'm wrong here, that this is going to play directly into rate setting, really, how we set rates for those in the district, as well as money coming in from the rest of the county as well. So it really sets up rate setting and the future mission, not just of this organization, but the permanent board after it, because that'll be embedded in those rates in that GO bond.
Great point, point, Corky.
And then, of course, I guess the follow-up to that too is if those are the rates, if that's built into the rates, then of course that's, something we have to we're legally bound to do as well. So it's really important. It's very critical for us.
Does that comment spur any other questions or feedback?
I guess I would just, to follow up on Corky's comments, I understand what's being said, I believe, but I guess I want to clarify. It's my understanding that the committee is ultimately going to make recommendations to the board. They're going to do the work and do the development, but there's still going to be an involvement of the entire board that ultimately may impact how those recommendations might impact the rates. Correct?
Yes, absolutely. And we
Okay.
depend on, even though the mission, vision, values part is going to be relatively quick, we plan on coming back to the full board at multiple points to get kind of general sense of where everyone is. So we're not just bringing you something to adopt blind. We want to get your feedback at multiple points along the way.
Can I just ask a question, Evan, about the board the mission, vision, values? That's almost as bad as the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District. But that said, is there representation from at least one member from each of the 4 districts on the mission, vision, values? Because I think that would be important to get those perspectives.
We've got 2 of the 4 directly on the committee, and then there'll be a number of activities where we get board input, both from the drainage district boards and this board.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we get the voices of each of the 4 drainage, or I would like to suggest that we make an effort to get representation from each of the 4 districts, because all operate differently and have different visions.
Thank you, Mary Helen. Any other comments, questions? I know there was solicitation of interest for this subcommittee. And maybe you can expand on that a little bit, Evan, as far as how the committee was formed.
Sure. Yeah. So at this point, it's been 100% voluntary. Folks, I think it was in December, folks were asked to express interest in an initial slate of committees. At the time, it was just mission, vision, values, the revenue development, and executive director search. Soon, I just was a part of a discussion the other day where we were talking about when we were going to solicit interest for the other committees, which will include equity and environment, whatever names we give them, but essentially those topics. So at this point, it's been solicitation of interest. People emailed Kirsten, and that has been sort of the extent of it. Once we pass this resolution forming the committee will meet once to do our equity alignment discussion, but we'll also review a charter during that meeting and then bring that charter back to the full board to review and adopt so that we're 100% positive that everybody's on board with exactly the work that we'll be doing. So that will be next month that we'll bring the charter back. And our hope is that once this committee starts to meet, that everybody who says that they will participate will participate. We'll probably only meet 4 to 5 times over the course of I think it's going to end up being just shy of 3 months. So it's a good commitment over that short period of time, but it's building a really important foundation for this work. But it is voluntary. So, we ask you all to give of yourselves, which we really appreciate. We know that you have lots and lots of things going on.
So Mary Helen's comment about having representation from each of the districts is, obviously a good one. I don't know if this group has more opinion about soliciting interest from other folks to get on the subcommittee, or if what the opinion of the group is. So let's open it up for more discussion. Anybody?
This is Peggy, and we can always extend that offer to the various boards to see if somebody wants to participate and provide that opportunity. Because we have representation from MCDD and Penn 2. We would be looking at Penn 1 and SDIC. So we can check with them.
And the other thing is there's lots of opportunity to get input from other channels. One of the things we've been thinking about is MCDD staff. How do we make sure that they're engaged, and how do we talk to other, portions of the community? So I might suggest, Chair, if it's all right with you, have Stacy kind of walk through what our process is, and then come back, see if there's any remaining questions. Her presentation is just real quick, a couple slides, and then we'll go from there.
I think that's a great idea. Stacy, are you ready to go?
Me?
Steve, I am.
Excellent. Go ahead and take it away.
Okay, Kirsten, I think you have the slide deck. Thank you all for having me. I'm Stacy Humphrey. I am an associate principal at Coraggio Group. I know a couple of you from earlier in my career, and it's great to see you again. Let's go forward a slide here. Thanks, Kirsten. The project team that Coraggio brings to you includes Chris Harder, who most recently was the executive director of Business Oregon, which I believe has some ties to this work. Kathleen Holt, who is our diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist, and who will be helping with the equity alignment discussion that Evan talked about. And then it also, I think, has come up in some of the other conversations during our hour together. And me, Stacy Humphrey. Chris is your project lead, and I will be your project manager. And we are looking forward to doing this project for you and with you. Next slide, please, Kirsten. Coraggio Group specializes and really focuses on three main areas of work: strategic planning, leadership, and change management. We are very much a strategy and change consulting firm. That said, we try very hard to make sure we're a listening organization, and we work in partnership with you, our client, to craft a path forward that works best for you and the challenges that you are confronting. We try to make sure that our project management is grounded in some really great practices. We had an immersion session, I want to say about a week and a half ago, Evan, with a couple staff members to make sure that we're really grounded in some of the practicalities of what this work needs to accomplish and some of the hoped for outcomes. And then we have a regular cadence of check-ins together. Next slide, please, Kirsten. As far as an overall project roadmap, we typically organize our work into three phases: get clear, get focused, and get moving. Get clear is really an information gathering phase. Get focused is when we roll our sleeves up, get dirt under our nails, and figure out what exactly will the mission, vision, values be. And for this project also, what are the key imperatives? I think that was part of the scope of work, as well as the objectives. How are we measuring progress towards those imperatives? And then get moving. That will be the work that we do to help get you set up for the next year's work. And get clear, to some of what Evan was saying, we do make sure that we are getting as robust input as we can. We are working on designing a survey that can go out to whom you wish for it to go out to gain input on what is important in the mission, vision, and values discussion. We are looking also at making sure that we have opportunity to interview stakeholders. This could also include board members from the districts that may not otherwise be represented. So we're sure that we get those voices at the table and part of the conversation. And then also we have capacity to do a number of focus groups. I know Evan and I have been in conversation about how exactly do we structure the interviews and focus groups to make sure that we are having the most robust input from the diverse stakeholders in the district that we possibly can get. We will culminate and synthesize what we learned from all of that into an insight report, which will tell us some of the key themes that will become important as we look at the vision, mission, and values, and also the imperatives for the district as it moves forward. In the Get Focused column, that middle column, green, we'll be then diving into a series of workshops with that committee, the subset of this board, to really dive into what is the vision, what is the mission, what are the values. As that's conceived right now, it would look like a 2-hour meeting about once every other week. Evan and I are working on that, and we know it's really important to get those on calendars now. You all are super busy humans with lots of other commitments. So we want to make sure that this is easily visible and predictable for you. Embedded in that will be, we have opportunity for a couple community forums to make sure that we can go out to community and understand what are some of the key things. And also a full board check-in at the May 17 meeting is anticipated, where we hope to use the Zoom poll everywhere feature, the Zoom polling feature, or a poll everywhere feature, to make sure that we can get a read of the whole board on the direction of the committee as a midpoint check-in. Next slide, I think. As we read the RFP when it came out, we know that equity is very important to this whole process. And while this does say third bullet down, establishment of an equity lens, I want to make sure that I point out this slide deck was prepared for the snowpocalypse that we had a month ago. And since that time, we've modernized some of the way that we're thinking about it. We will be looking at having an equity alignment discussion with the committee and some staff to make sure that we have a common understanding of equity as a decision-making tool for this work, and then also for other decisions that the district may be approaching. Next slide, Kirsten. Thank you. And then just to reiterate, I think what Evan had said in some of the conversation, we are looking at having a diverse stakeholder engagement process through the survey, which can go out very broadly, focus groups, interviews. We want to make sure that we are having all the voices at the table that the district needs to hear from as it charts its way forward. And that's both in the gathering information phase and also as we're looking at the planning of the mission, vision, and values and imperatives. With that, let's go to the next slide. I think it's just questions. I hope that short presentation helped answer some questions and probably prompted some new ones. And thank you so much for having us be part of your work.
Thank you, Stacy. If you could, we can stop sharing screen. Thank you. Are there other questions from the board? I think that was helpful in talking through how there are some other input points for folks from all stakeholder groups. Do we as a board feel like
Mr. Chair, I was just going to ask just a couple of questions. One is sort of a comment. I especially appreciate the mentioning and the framework that we're already starting to develop that talks about centering the voices of historically marginalized communities. I think that's critically important. So I want to applaud the team for thinking through that. One thing that I have been noticing kind of working on projects, for example, the Interstate Bridge project, we're also trying to advance equity, is how difficult that is to do given the COVID environment. And just wanting us, as we're thinking about our own outreach strategies, to be thinking earlier rather than later, ways in which we'll reach out to historically marginalized communities, given the fact that we can't meet in person. And how do we actually create meaningful opportunities for engagement in our process, which is taking a little bit longer and requires us to be much more thoughtful and intentional. So just wanted to offer that.
Thank you, John L. Other comments, questions from the board? I'm not seeing any. Are we ready for a motion?
As Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
yeah, I motion to approve the resolution as indicated in our packets.
Thank you, John L. Do we have a
No,
second?
second. A second.
Thank you, Corky. Any other discussion? Mary Helen, did you have something?
No, I just couldn't get unmuted fast enough. So John L. did fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got a motion on the table. We have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Hearing none. Resolution number R-2021-0303 passes unanimously. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Stacy. And look forward to seeing that subcommittee get going with the work. Next up on the agenda, we have Colin. Colin is going to give us an update on the revenue model. Go ahead and take it away, Colin.
Hi, sorry, just take 1 second here. My computer isn't working, so I'm operating off my phone, which is fun. Okay, Kirsten, go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you all a quick update on where we are on the revenue development and the RFP that was out on the streets, and hoping to get some good response on that. And so just a quick review of what that proposal or the RFP was asking proposers to provide, which was really preparing and coordinating the development and providing a recommendation of a recommended revenue structure for the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District. That contractor would be facilitating committee meetings, coordinating and preparing some of the public outreach that is necessary for it, as well as going through really the much more expanded set of tools that the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District has at their disposal, and to really test those different tools, build them into a model, incorporate some of the things that Andrew and Bill were talking about around asset management best practices, and all of this needs to be coordinated through the board. And so where we ended up, and actually go to the next slide, but is a bit, it needs some updating that I'll talk through. But the anticipated timeline, we had that out there with proposals coming in at the end of February. We had 2 proposers, and we went through the process, and we had a robust conversation. A scoring committee came together, scored the proposals, and also had interviews with both of the proposers. And based on conversations amongst the interview and scoring committee, as well as with the as with some other contractors that we knew do perform this kind of work, we made the decision that we do need to extend this and basically post the RFP. There's a few reasons why the 2 proposals were responsive to the minimum qualifications, but ultimately they were proposing to something that, given more time and further development of this, we recognize that the timeline, the overall timeline that was requested of them, was too short. Having a recommended revenue structure, making that recommendation by the end of June 2022 was too fast to actually go through the proper process and actually communicate and solicit feedback from the community, and do a robust outreach effort that this work really needs. This is absolutely foundational work And then the second part that we had recognized through the process is that the overall budget for the work was inadequate. And so the budget and timeline really was inadequate to meet the broader scope that was needed. So the total the total cost that was associated with that RFP was $150,000. And we really believe that about $250,000 is necessary, as well as extending it through the end of June 2023. What we are proposing is to basically put it back out there, hopefully get a little bit more response. We'll definitely be looking to different board members that have experience in this field to help try to encourage different people that have been aware of this or have done this kind of work to propose. And we think that this will delay the work by about 2 months. And so I think it's important to also note that we can still meet at the end of April as a Revenue Development Committee and actually start, basically work on a charter for this group, as well as start reviewing some of the previous material and what kind of outcomes we want. So there is a delay associated with it. I think it's absolutely manageable within our goal of meeting a 2025 election. And I think we also will get a much better product out of this that has more robust community engagement and more time to do the work that is necessary. So with that, I will stop and take any questions, or if Peggotty or anyone else associated with putting this out there wants to add anything, please do.
And I would just like to say, I will reiterate what Colin said. This is the foundational work that is critical. Once you get through your mission, vision, values, this is the big lift. And as we said, as Colin said, we got 2 responses that weren't, we felt they needed more to get the work done. And we heard from a couple, and I think actually James Canoff is on the phone or on this call, who was our procurement person. And he actually checked with some of the people that we thought might propose and we didn't hear from. And the response was not enough money and too short a timeline for the effort. And, I firmly believe that we only have one. I've used this expression multiple times, but I'm going to use it again. We only got one bite at this apple, and to do it right the first time in a way that also provides a mechanism and transparency to the public, because as we go through this, I keep looking at this revenue model, and what we do in an open and transparent manner just builds on our opportunity to go out for a GO bond in 25. So this is just one piece on top, laying on top of another. And it's important we get the A team on this.
Thank you, Peggotty. Thank you, Colin. Go ahead, Kirsten, you can stop sharing at this point. I'll just open it up to questions and comments.
Steve, I had a comment or question. I guess Peggotty, hearing you say that the responses were not significant or as good as we would have liked to have them been. Is there an and those are pretty paltry dollar amounts, and I could see why we would get a low response. And I'm just wondering, do we have the capacity to increase those fees? Because you're right, we only have one. I mean, this is like foundational. Like we've got to get this right. So I'm just kind of wondering what options do we have to maybe expand and enlarge or increase that contract?
I think we do. We're going to be talking a little bit about our revenue for next year in a few minutes. I also believe what we really have talked about in increasing the budget and extending the timeline a bit is that that this would be put out in phases. I mean, it would hopefully we'd have the same consultant through the whole process, but that there are checkpoints because of monetary and making sure that they're adhering to what we need and we're maintaining our budget and being able to have checkpoints as we go. So I know that's not a direct answer of absolutely we have every dime we need, but I believe you will have the money moving forward to let me say that again. I have hope that we will have all the money moving forward, and it's not going to be limited to June 2022, but will extend further out. So
Thank you.
I'm not trying to be too elusive. It's that conversation a little bit on money is coming up. So
So Peggy, what elements of work did you find missing in the responses?
Couple different things. One, you know, because there were two different people, so they have two different methodologies. Let me say this. I want the A team. Okay, so that's one response to this, to your question. Number two, we need to have a group that is able to make a model or develop a modeling process that can be as transparent as we can be and really be able to, I look at this as kind of levers. You have different levers. You may have different levels for levels that you attach for equity, and you may have high, medium, and low. How does that impact your rates? If we have environmental, high, medium, and low, how does that impact your rate? And so that also provides the community a chance to better understand and participate in that structural process. And I just did not hear that. I did not feel that was there.
Okay, thank you.
Just want to point out that Board Chair Michael Jordan's joined us now. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
Hello, Michael Jordan.
Hey, Peggy and Colin, are you changing the scope at all of or just the timeline and the dollar amount? Because this was the one when we talked about that I was a little
concerned about.
Well, it just felt like it was a little bit of a unicorn because we both want the sort of utility rate model and, you know, economic kind of background. And we also wanted an entity that could be really good at community engagement. And so it feels to me like those are really different skill sets.
And Colin, is it all right if I go ahead? I'm going to answer Anne. Two things. The scope did change and got wider. So it does justify, you know, a bigger budget. And on the answer of having a finance group and a community outreach group, I think we talked about this before, but if I would see that the finance group may end up hiring as a subcontractor doing some of that outreach, so that and part of the reason I respond that way is we are going to be doing other community outreach, but my concern being having two separate contracts for this particular function is going to be, it's a lot of work and staff has limited capacity. And if you put that responsibility onto a consultant who oversees the outreach, there also tends to be a what I would consider, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it anyway, a synergies. This is what we're working. How's the public going to respond to that? So there's closer alignment there.
Any other questions for Colin or Peggotty? Not
Yeah,
hearing.
Colin, what is our next check-in point? When do you expect to have the RFP out, and when do you expect to get responses back? Because again, this is an absolutely critical part of our work.
Yes, so we'll need at least a couple weeks, and I'll let Jim, our procurement specialist, correct me, but we'll need at least a couple weeks just to make sure that we have everything updated appropriately. And then we're going to put it back out there for the same timeline. We can't have an accelerated timeline, so that is having it posted for at least 5 or 6 weeks. So the next checkpoint for this board will be at the April meeting. You'll be making a decision whether or not to have the revenue analysis subcommittee be a deliberative meeting or deliberative committee or not. After that, we'll be able to meet as a committee and actually establish a charter. While that meeting is happening, that RFP will be posted, and then we're looking at a similar timeline. And I'll look to Jim to kind of correct me here, but we're about 8 weeks out now from when the RFPs or the proposals would be due. And then we'll have at least a week or so for the review committee to take a look at it, score it, and make a decision. Will be another week after that. So, in total, it's a little over 2 months delay, because we still would be, at this point, if we were going forward with the current procurement, we'd still be a couple weeks out before actually having a contract. So yeah, about 2 month delay in total.
Could I ask a question? And this is from somebody that does none of this, but we have a lot of people on this committee that might have had experience working with consultants that do this kind of work. Is it proper or possible? I know, Peggy, you said somebody reached out to ones that they might have knowledge of somebody or some group that would be the best possible candidate, and encourage them to share that information. I kind of operate because I don't know everything, but on the George Patton said, if you don't know the answers, it's important to know who does. And so I think that would be helpful maybe here. I don't know, just from the sidelines, but I would think that there's committee members that might know this would be the perfect group, or and then we approach it that way.
Based on the size, we have to go through a formal process based on the dollar amount of the contract, but we are reaching out to committee members and others who might have a recommendation to make sure that they get the RFP, and so that we have an ability to we want a larger pool.
And Peggotty, just a question to that. Do our existing procurement boilerplate language have provisions around MWSB requirements or aspirational goals?
I'm going to have Jim answer that because I did not see the document. I've seen what we've used in the past. So Jim, can you answer that as far as how we've included that in our efforts?
We don't have specific goals listed, but we do stress, and there is some criteria there to look at equity situations, some of which would come from the MESB certification process, certified or skills in that area.
And just a follow-up question to that, is that criteria scored as part of the overall process? In other words, are we in part scoring candidates based upon their answers to that question as part of our procurement process?
Yes, it is one of the weighted criteria used in the scoring.
Okay, thank you for that.
Welcome.
Thank you, John L. Any other questions, comments, feedback? Okay, we're a little behind schedule, so I think we're going to move on to the next item. This is a continuation of the budget hearing that we had opened at the last meeting. It remained open. Casey Short is going to present. And Casey, are you ready to go?
Yes, if you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Yay. Okay. We talked about this a little last time and then questions ensued. My part today is just to reiterate what it is overall we're doing. And then Colin's going to talk about the particulars about how much money there is in what different budgets to support the UFSWQD this coming year and this year. The particulars on the supplemental budget are that we're getting the LRC board has agreed to send over $122,832 to support your operations in the current year. You need to have a supplemental budget to do that because you're recognizing revenue that you weren't anticipating when the budget was approved. So you have to go through all the processes, notice the meeting, have the hearing, and then vote on this resolution that is in your packet. That's really all I've got to say, other than when it gets back to the action part of it, there are a couple of minor clerical amendments to be made to the resolution. They don't change anything. It's just we've got a couple of errors in it. And with that, if there's no questions on that technical part of it, I'm going to turn it over to Colin to talk about the what and where of the money.
Okay, thank you, Casey. To try to get us back on time, I'm going to try to go through these quickly, but a warning, the first slide is confusing, somewhat necessarily so, but Kirsten, if you could go to the next slide. Oh, I didn't know that this was, could you just go forward a few slides, please, so that it's fully in there? Keep on going.
And just as Colin gets started, there was a lot of question about buckets of money, where they were coming from, how they were coming. So we were trying to provide a picture and then also a spreadsheet of the dollars. And this, I'm going to let Colin take it over, but this should not look that much different than what you saw probably in the September meeting about kind of our different pieces of our organization and who has control of the dollars. So from that, I will turn it over to Colin.
Yes, thank you, Peggy. This is the complex web that we live within, but just wanted to talk through that there's really 3 buckets of money that we're talking about, which is the $40,000, which is the grants funded to the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District that are your budget. That's the money, the revenue that came in for your adopted budget. There is also $123,000, which is really the discussion around the supplemental budget, which was grant dollars from the Levy Ready Columbia Intergovernment Agreement Board. And then there's the $500,000, which is the state of Oregon grant funds that are passed through Business Oregon. And so just wanted to refresh that where these funds come in is not the same. So both the $123,000 for the LRC IGA board, as well as the $500,000 from the state, go through the Joint Contracting Authority. And so the Joint Contracting Authority is able to direct the grant funding to be used in support of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, as well as be able to pass through, in the case of the $123,000 grant, able to pass by resolution that funding to the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board to actually adopt into your budget. So it's a bit confusing, but the $500,000 cannot be transferred into your budget, cannot be adopted, but it is used to support your efforts. But the $40,000 and the $123,000 can be. And I also just want to make sure that I note that there is a lot of work done by Multnomah County Drainage District. MCDD staff are able to be reimbursed based on the Business Oregon grant funding, but there's a lot of work that is done by MCDD staff that supports this work. So I want to make sure that that is noted, and that's sort of under a different authority altogether. So I'm going to go through 2 slides. The next slide is
Well,
just,
can we stop just a minute, Colin, and see, does anybody have any questions about this puzzle? Okay. That's great.
Thanks for stopping, Peggy. I was on a sprint.
I know. Pictures are worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
So the next piece.
Oh, go ahead, Colin. Sorry.
The next piece of the puzzle is sort of where we are at with that $500,000 grant funding and what that means to fiscal year 21 and sort of the total funding source or total available funds. So within fiscal year 20, the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, though it was stood up in May, actually had a lot of work that was done on its behalf through the grant funding that was done by MCDD staff that really started in March. And so while the board didn't have an adopted budget, there was work that was done, even just staffing those meetings, but also putting everything together and sort of getting you off the ground that was able to be funded through the State of Oregon grant. So in total, that was $36,000 or $36,018. Which left $463,982 that was available for your fiscal year 21 budget. So that's your total for the $500,000. And that's just important because when you may not have seen it because it was actually in the Joint Contracting Authority's budget, but what the expected amount of revenue coming in off of that grant was $450,000. And so it actually, there was a little bit more available because we had to sort of ratchet back our work, especially in June, where it seemed like there wasn't going to be the possibility of the grant being reallocated because of COVID relief needs meant that we sort of scaled back our work as well as other funding needs. So the next slide provides what your total source of funds are for FY21. And please let me know and Casey and Peggy know if this was not what was requested, but I think this is really what we needed to show at that last meeting to sort of see how all of these pieces fit together. So really just looking at fiscal year 21, your amended budget is the $40,000. You can see in the rows of the matrix how that was budgeted out in your budget, plus the $122,832 that was coming through the LRC grant. And that was added in, and you have that in the resolution that Casey and Hong have provided. So the total dollars there are your $162,832. And that is really the supplemental budget which you are adopting. It's also important to know that there's additional funds. So you can see that through what the balance left on that $500,000 State of Oregon grant is to come to your total of $626,814 that were available this year. Recognizing for a number of reasons that we're not able to go through all of that State of Oregon grant. We are in the process of working with the state to see if we're able to extend that and be able to continue using it after the end of this fiscal year. But please know that we are working to, based on this budget and based on the work that's required, expend those funds first because the rest of your funds could be a beginning balance, but the grant funds really need to be spent through Business Oregon on that reimbursable basis and would not be considered a beginning balance that just kind of drops down for you to work with. And I can definitely go into any of the details or sort of the assumptions on the line items, but I'll leave it there for questions, or Peggy, if you'd like to add anything additional.
I think you did a fine job. Is this what the board was really looking for at the last meeting? That was our interpretation. It was, and we apologize for being remiss to not have that at that meeting.
Well, this is great, Colin, Peggotty. Does the board have any questions with the spreadsheet that Colin has provided up?
Only, is this
Andy?
in our packet?
No, it's not.
We can forward it. We can forward this to you all.
That would
Yeah.
just help me as a reference tool.
Yes. We will
Andy,
do
I
that.
think you had a question.
Yeah, so originally we started out with a $780,000 work plan, and then it got pared down to 540, and then we kind of worked it back up to 663. Am I doing okay so far?
Mhm.
And then, so this ends up really being, at the end of the day, we've got about 626,000 to work with. And we had the 40,000 that was allocated to be allocated basically for specific line items. And then, so we're doing the same thing with the 123,000 that we're getting. And I'm okay with that. I've got a couple of comments though. Originally, we looked at, we had allocated 10,000 basically for legal and another 10 for the audit. And in our December meeting, we received a spend estimate through October 31st that we'd spent 12.3 in legal. And so with the 10,000 that we approved today, we're actually over. We're kind of in the red, 2,300 on that line item.
Tanny, the legal budget comes from two different locations. You see the external legal and auditing services that was budgeted for the $40,000. So that's one part of it. But we also, within that financial budget and policy and the administrative costs against the grant, we're able to pay. So most of the Miller Nash time is actually in, as well as Hong and Kelly's legal time, are actually in the Oregon grant funds.
Okay, because on this sheet, it was expensed as 12.3 under that line item. That's the only reason I bring it up. It wasn't in the global one, if you're following me.
I think I am following you, but so yeah, there's two locations where that you know, the external legal and auditing fees are payable, and so yeah, I can definitely follow up with you on where those different things are, and I believe I prepared that, and it's entirely possible that you know, I should have put that in one of those other, you know, the Business Oregon line items, but we were trying to sort of summarize all of it as your larger bucket of funds, as opposed to breaking it out as you see here with the three different buckets.
And that's why I'm just looking at it and it's not, you know, within. So I was trying to make sure that whatever we do, we're approving enough funds to handle things that we've already spent. And then the other thing I wanted to actually bring up, and I know we're pushing some of this off, but the rate model was reduced quite a bit from what the subcommittee had recommended. And I was just curious why that was.
I guess I'm not sure. So what subcommittee are you referring to? And I guess I'm not exactly sure what that dollar recommendation is that you refer to.
When this came up, the budget subcommittee had met and we had made a recommendation back as far as what we thought the 123 should go for. And that was at the time when we went and talked to LRC about them giving us the money.
Yeah, so the $45,000. Oh, go ahead, please.
No, so what you're saying is you were thinking the whole, this is confusing. You were thinking the whole 23 was going to go to the revenue model?
No.
Or just, I'm a little bit confused because we've had the 150 budget for quite a while. So that's why I didn't, yeah.
Right. And when things got cut, the revenue model was one of them that got a pretty good haircut.
Yeah, it did.
And so the budget subcommittee had recommended fully funding that back at 75.
Yeah.
And then parsing out some of the other funds, but I was just curious why that one in particular was put where it was, I guess.
Okay. We can get back to you on that, Tanny.
Okay.
And Peggy, when we're thinking about this, we have the opportunity to take a look at this budget and say, in point of fact, we really have a $250,000 budget that we're going to set for the revenue development model with outside consultants, not including staff time. So it's really going to be 250, not 223.
Correct. But I did not want to put 250 on here until we had talked to you all before this meeting. I mean, I'm not stepping over your toes here. You know.
I understand.
So,
And the 250 will be spread across 3 fiscal years.
yeah.
Any other questions, discussion? I'm not seeing any. Are we ready for a motion? And if we are, let's stop sharing.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes,
you need to hold a public hearing on this. Whether you do it after the motion or before is up to you. But I just wanted to make sure you remember that you do need to open a public hearing.
And I think the hearing's open. We continued it, and you'll need to take testimony if there is any today. I think that's correct.
So have we received any public testimony on this item? Or is anybody in audience that wishes to testify? I'm not hearing any. Kirsten, did you get anything on this item from the public?
I did not receive any testimony via email, and I also am not aware of anyone who is intending to call in today.
Okay, so we believe the public hearing is still open, and we have not received any public testimony. So procedurally, are we ready for a motion? I believe we are, just waiting for that to be made. If it would be helpful, can we bring up the agenda with the motion language, Kirsten? Thank you. I'm waiting for a motion.
Okay, I will.
Mary Helen.
I move to approve resolution number, sorry, I have to get my screen, R-2021-02-02, adopting a supplemental budget for fiscal year 2020-2021 and making appropriations.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second. It's Corky.
So we have a motion by Mary Helen, a second by Corky. Is there any further discussion on the item?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
As I mentioned in my opening little thing, there are a couple of amendments that need to be made to the resolution to correct technical clerical types of errors in the last whereas, because this thing has gone through about 3 iterations. In the last whereas, it has a couple of dates for when the hearing was held and when you adopt it. That needs to change. So currently it says the board has at its February 16th meeting followed the procedures, blah, 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 holding a public hearing, which was noticed February 11th, which was more than 5 days prior to the hearing on February 16th. Those 3 dates need to change to March 15th today. For the 2 places it says February 16th, and where it says February 11th for the notice being published, that should say February 22nd. The other change that needs to be made is in the exhibit, Exhibit A, under the finance program, the general consulting item, this is on, well, Exhibit A, it immediately follows the resolution. The general consulting item should be reduced from 19,000 to 18,832, and the subtotal of the finance program reduced from 64,000 to 63,832, just to get it consistent with the precise numbers that are in the resolution. That's the only place the numbers need to change. They're right every place else.
So,
Okay, so this is out of my bandwidth, but can we just say, accept the amendments is, okay, go, you say how it should be said.
I was going to say, Mr. Chair, if the motion maker and the second will agree to those, we can vote on them all together.
Okay.
I agree.
You agree, Mary Helen Corky?
Yeah, I agree. This is Corky.
So the motion by Mary Helen and the second by Corky, both parties agree to the amendments described by Casey just now. So we are going to vote on the resolution with amendments as described by Casey. Any other discussion about the item before we vote? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed?
Nay.
So we have the motion passes, not unanimously. We do have one nay vote by Tanny Stephenson. Thank you, staff, for presenting the item.
Thank you.
Do I need to officially close the hearing at this point, or did I do that incorrectly? So I think we're closed at this point.
I guess after you voted on it, the hearing's over with regardless.
Yeah,
Right.
I think we're done.
Okay. We're moving on to the next item. That is fiscal year 21-22 funding presented by Board Chair Michael Jordan. Michael, you ready to take it away?
Well, sure. I think since we're quite a bit over time, I will simply say that I'm still working on trying to get a proposal regarding potentially having a backup for if we do not receive funding from the legislature. And a term sheet is being developed, and I'd like to bring that to the budget or revenue committee. I don't know which would be appropriate here, but have a few folks take a look at it to make sure that we're okay if in fact we can get to agreement. So we're pretty early in this process, yet it does need to be completed, I think, by the end of April. And again, our hope is that the legislature sees its way clear to give us $1 million each year for the biennium. But if that doesn't happen, we may not know it till June. So we're working on Plan B right now, which would be some form of a loan. And again, we're putting the term sheet together as we speak, trying to negotiate that. So I just wanted to update you that that discussion's still going on. I'd like to bring it, I guess it would be to the butt. Go ahead, Peggy.
I was just going to say we can bring it to the Revenue Shortfall Committee. We could set that meeting up in the next couple of weeks, and then or the other is we have our first budget meeting scheduled for April, I think 6th.
Yeah, so that would be great. I'd love to be able to talk with the group about what we have at that time.
On April 6th.
Yeah, if that's okay with everybody. It's something to talk over whatever we have. It's still in flux, unfortunately, but I'd like to run it through the committee before it comes to the full board, that's for sure.
Okay, we'll set that up then.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Can I add two other items to that discussion? One is, I just want to confirm what Colin alluded to. We had a discussion with Chris Cummings, Director of Business Oregon, last week, because I don't believe we can spend all that that grant money before the end of June. And so we were looking at the opportunity or the potential for extending those funds. And Business Oregon has put it into their process of all the other funding that's asking to be extended past June, and it's in a packet. I can't guarantee anything, but they have said in the past that generally if they're put in the Business Oregon carryover, it's okay. You know, it will be there for next fiscal year. But all bets is off with COVID and the state budget, but I feel confident. The second I wanted to talk a little bit about, and Mike may want to address it, is that the chair and I and Evan and our state lobbyist, Mark Landauer, did meet with the Speaker's office and her staff about the funding, the $2 million request. And I can tell people she was open to it. I also want to say we've got work ahead of us to set that in motion, but I feel like there are opportunities. I think that one thing I want to share with the board from that, in addition to that good news and potential, is also the opportunity. They were both, Chris Cummings and the Speaker's office, were both very impressed with the amount of work this board has accomplished over this last 10 months. They were pretty, you know, it's like, but no, I shouldn't say this, but when the team is really moving and making progress and clear progress, there's more of an interest in backing that team. And if I misspoke, Mike, please correct me, but that's the general. I was going to say bet on a horse, but that's just me and horses. But it's a good. They were very surprised at the amount of work that's gotten done, and and recognizing that what we've done is the foundational work, and there is much more work ahead, and it needs to be funded.
Well, I would only add, I wasn't in the Cummings meeting, but in the Speaker's meeting, there's no question the Speaker is very supportive of the effort. She's supportive of the district. She is impressed by the amount of work that's been done. I think the Speaker, as she has to be, is always concerned about legislative strategy and the way the legislature works. And to be honest, if the $2 million that we're requesting was seen as the Speaker's baby, there would be strategy there to hold that $2 million hostage. And so I think for everybody's sake, I think the Speaker just wants to let the session play out a bit, let's put it that way. And I think at the appropriate moment, there'll be support. Now, whether they can get $2 million, $1 million each year or not in the 21 session, I don't know the answer to that. And there's a lot of water that still has to go under the bridge. But I don't think there's any question the Speaker is very supportive of our effort as a district.
Can I add a little anecdotal story? She has that office in the Kenton Firehouse, and I used to see her off and on, but hadn't seen her for a year, and just coincidentally went to pick up the mail for the project, and she was coming down the stairs, and we did that sort of like, we have masks on 6 feet apart. So we went back outside, and we talked mostly about gardening, but as I was starting to get in my car, she came and rapped on the window, and she said, I'd be remiss to not tell you how wonderful MCD is and all the work that you, and I said, wait, not me, are doing. She said they've accomplished an immense amount of work and they're doing great work. And I don't see that very often. So it was just kind of her way to say, great job, everything's going well. And I was impressed that she took the time to do that.
It's nice to hear, Mary Helen.
She also has a very big vegetable garden.
Peggy, did you have other updates?
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a couple different things. We went out with the executive director position. I think when we met last on the 1st of March, we were thinking we had 40. We actually had 30 applicants. As you know, Michael Jordan, Mary Helen, Bob Salinger, and Ann Gravitt are representing the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District for that, for the review committee. And then there's representatives from MCD, including Ken Anderton, Nancy Hendrickson, and myself. First round of interviews are Wednesday and Thursday of this week. We're anticipating having 9 interviews. It was a really impressive group of applicants. I have to say, I was very impressed with the applicants. And then we anticipate the second round will be March 31st. And then we will be the top 2 or 3 candidates. We'd like to have staff review, have a chance to meet with them, the deputy directors and some staff. And then it's probably a final decision, either the end of that week, end of first week of April, or into the first of the second week. So we are moving along on that. Also wanted to let you know that the districts had already submitted, they submitted the letter and financial certification to the Corps last week before last, for the Portland Metro levy system feasibility study. So that is moving forward. We also had an opportunity, and I really appreciated it, that Bob Salinger, Michael had some technical difficulty, but Bob Salinger and myself and Evan met with Kevin Bryce to talk about some of the environmental issues as it relates to that. That was a discussion that we had at our board meeting. We followed up with that. I anticipate we'll be having further discussions, but there's a lot. One thing that the Corps was able to do is at least to identify other funding sources that are out there for environmental, because this particular study is really restricted to flood management, but they have other funding sources to do some environmental uplift in the area. The other, I think that's pretty much it. I just want to let you know we'll be next month. I just wanted to give you a heads up. April 5th, it was the wrong date. We'll have a budget meeting to get that going for you all, and an April 17th meeting. We're going to bring in Dr. Lewis to talk about the history of the indigenous people that have been part of this community long before we were. And so people talk about the people in the watershed, and also we will be forming the deliberative committee for the revenue development, adopt our policies, and move forward on an approved budget, because in May, by May 15th, we have to submit an approved budget by this board to TSCC, who then will hold a meeting with participants of this board. And we're planning to adopt that budget on June 21st.
Peggy, what's TSSC?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that. I always
Sorry.
forget. Tax, supervisory, conservation, and
Commission.
There you go. They are the overseer of public budgets for they oversee Multnomah
Multnomah
County, the city of Portland, the school districts, and everyone. So they oversaw the budget we submitted last year, and they will review and ask questions.
If I could just, whoops, I'm muted, so I know I'm not. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. The TSCC is the Supervisory Conservation Commission for all local government budgets in Multnomah County that are subject to local budget law. The reason you've never seen them in the Penn 2 or any of the other drainage district budgets is that they are all exempt from local budget law under their statutes.
Thank you.
So
I'll
there you have
reserve my comments about why we need another level of bureaucracy for another day.
It's an old argument. Thanks.
Do we have anything else good of the order?
I do, Mr. Vice Chair. I want to thank you for doing this today. So folks know, I was promoting the district at a seminar for lawyers and floodplain managers in Oregon and Washington. So it was interesting. But you all look great.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the work you're doing there.
Oh, thanks for helping.
No problem. Anything else good of the order? I was going to say, if this meeting was in person, I would have brought you all dark chocolates just to show you why I'm better than Michael in some aspects. I have to have something.
That's a challenge if I've ever heard one.
I'll text you my address.
Okay. I think this meeting is now adjourned.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank
Bye.
you.